Welcome to the Taylor Made Tasty podcast. I'm Taylor, retired serial quitter turned goal boss coach, speaker, and consultant. I believe a beautiful life starts with a beautiful mindset. Join me as we amplify confidence, resilience, and actionable tools on the road to quit quitting on you and your vision. You are worthy of your goals, so let's go get there. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. I am beyond thrilled to introduce you to Angie of Not Your Average Runner. She is a certified running and mindset coach who wants to live in a world where everyone is free to feel fit and fabulous at any size. Since 2013, she has been helping larger-bodied women who have never felt athletic start running so they can feel empowered and confident. She is the host of the popular podcast, Not Your Average Runner, as well as the author of 3 books on running titled Not Your Average Runner, Not Your Average 5K, and Not Your Average Half Marathon, which are all part of her mission to help 1 million women start running. Please welcome the OG Rebel Runner, Angie, to Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. Hi, Jill.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm still fangirling a bit that you were so approachable and graciously said yes to being a guest on the podcast. So I'm very happy you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes. So how I found you was I had a less than awesome situation at a group run that said it was for all age, or not all ages, all paces, and I got left in the dust. And I was like, I need to find my people, because I know they're out there, but I need to find them. And so I wanted you to first give everyone a little bit of background on you and the movement that you have created in this world.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, I need you to know that I can 100% relate to coming to a run that says it's going to handle all paces and then in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, basically seeing everybody else take off without me. So the struggle is real.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I mean, it's part of the reason that I created Not Your Average Runner. But just to kind of a little bit of background on me. So I've been plus size my whole life. Basically since maybe college, right? I actually was not plus size when I was in high school, even though I thought I was very fat. And I'm like, oh, size 10. That's what I was.
So
right?
Relatable. Oh
right?
My gosh. Yes.
I know. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. So, but I've basically been legit plus size, since I was in college for the most part. And, I've always kind of not really thought of myself as athletic, even though I did play tennis in high school. I swam in high school, but I wouldn't have called myself an athletic person. But I was always kind of it would be so cool to be a runner. And I would go out and I would try to run, and I'd have, after 30 seconds, I'd have a stitch in my side, and I'd just think, oh, well, I'm doing it wrong. This isn't for me or whatever. But I kept coming back around to it. And sometime kind of in my late 20s, I thought, all right, I'm really going to make this happen. But I was very embarrassed because I was overweight and I didn't want anybody to know what I was doing because it wasn't a thing, right? This was in the 90s. It was not a thing to be proud of being fat. It was not a thing to be overweight and athletic. And so I would just put on these big baggy clothes. I would run after dark in my neighborhood, and I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. Eventually I got found out. Somebody that I worked with found out that I was training for this 5K, and she kind of came up to me in the hall at work and she whispered in my ear, which is right, that's how I was so secretive. She whispered in my ear, she's like, I know what you're doing and I want you to know that you're my hero. And that really shifted something for me. because and I was just doing run walk, and I kind of had the feeling bad because I wasn't able to run, like even run the whole 5K. Although surprisingly enough, I actually did show up on race day and run the whole 5K without stopping. This is when you're 29 years old, right? Like
Yes.
you can put yourself through anything. But that was a moment for me, I think, where I recognized that, hey, I'm not the only one doing this, and I'm not the only one that feels uncomfortable or weird. Like it really just kind of started a whole different line of thought in my brain. And again, I was, that was still almost 30 years ago. Jeez, almost 30 years ago. But I think that sort of like shifted my brain a little bit into maybe you don't need to be embarrassed. Maybe you can run during the daylight and not trip over things. Maybe this is something that's more than just you. And so I started kind of coming out of the closet, I guess, a little bit. And then I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years later, I was training for, what the heck was it? It was the Broad Street Run in Philadelphia, which is like a 10-mile run. And I think my brain was still like the audacity to be fat and training for this thing. Like my brain was still like kind of struggling with it, but evolving into a place of like, hey, maybe there are other people out there like me. So I think that's kind of where it started. And then somewhere along the line, not somewhere along the line, one of my best friends said, I want to do this 60-mile thing. It's like the breast cancer 3-day where you walk 20 miles a day and you camp out overnight. And I weighed, I was close to 300 pounds. And I thought, oh, this will be an easy way for me to lose weight. Like the shit that we think, right? I was like,
in 3 days. Yes.
Right. I'm going to train for this thing and I'm going to lose all this weight. And so I hired a trainer because I thought I can't do this by myself. Like I'm going to need somebody to like help me. And so I hired a trainer and fast forward to the day of the event, I really hadn't lost any weight. I was definitely in no shape to do a 60-mile walk. And fortunately, the first 2 days got canceled because there was a huge rainstorm and there was mud everywhere. So so I only had to walk I think 15 of the 60 miles. But what happened during the time that I was training for that event, again, my body, I didn't lose weight, but my body became a lot stronger because I was doing a lot of strength training and I was working with a trainer who was just kind of like, let's not get so stressed out about how much you weigh and let's start working on what you think about yourself. And she introduced me to yoga and just like a totally different way of looking at my body and myself and not kind of telling myself the story that oh, you're worthless because you're fat. And that was 2009. Yes. And I feel like that's really where things started to change for me because within 3 years, I'd quit my job to become a personal trainer. I'd written a book about how to run when you're fat. And it just kind of took off from there. So I know that was a very long-winded story, but it's just been kind of interesting how running has always been there for me, and it's kind of shifted and changed over time from a way of feeling bad about myself to a way of feeling really good about myself and helping others do the same.
Yes, I love that. What a novel idea. Let's not focus on the scale. Let's focus on how we feel in our body, right? I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've built over time this, like I said, movement of not your average runners. And what does that mean to you? When you came up with this concept, what does the not your average runner mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically when you think of what does a runner look like and what does a runner do, right? We always imagine these very slender women on the cover of Runner's World with a little ponytail bouncing behind them and running half marathons and, maybe a 6-minute mile, maybe an 8-minute mile, but definitely not an 18-minute mile, right? We think of somebody who looks a certain way and eats a lot of kale and, right, all of those things.
Yes.
And I think I wanted to say hey, there's this whole other group of people out there running who don't look like the typical runner, right? And it for sure was the way I would describe myself. Yep, I'm not your average runner. And so like once I kind of started describing myself that way, it made sense to just say like, hey, let's just start a whole movement of people who identify as different than what most people would think of as the typical runner.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's hard too when you're beginning to not bring in that comparison of, well, I don't look like that. I don't dress, they don't maybe make those style of clothes in my size. I'm not running at that same pace or as long. So when you have a not your average runner start, like, where do they even begin?
I mean, I just kind of meet them where they're at, right? And so I think one of the things that makes the training that I teach different from something like a couch to 5K, because when you see the word couch to 5K, you think, okay, well, I'm on the couch right now. This should be for me. But in reality, it was created by a guy in his 20s at the time who was a runner and had been a runner for quite some time, and he wanted to help his mom start running. And so his mom, like, he created a run walk program with her to get her running 30 minutes, running a 5K in 30 minutes within about 8 weeks. And I mean, that's great when you're a 20-something dude, right? Who's been a runner all his life. But like most of us, especially me, I'm 54. A lot of my clients are in their 50s and even 60s. Probably my doctor would probably tell you, oh, she's at least 100 pounds overweight. And that's not a thing, right? Like that's not that couch to 5K. I work with so many people who are like, yep, I got to week 3 and I couldn't do anymore. So I would much rather start somebody with, what are you comfortable doing right now? And are you comfortable running for 10 seconds and then taking a walk break and then running for 10 more seconds? Awesome. Let's do that. Right. And for some runners, like that's literally how they run from when they start running to, 20 years later, they're still doing run and walk and run and walk. I still do run and walk. But and some people are like, well, I want to work up to running without stopping. I think that's a personal preference. Like, I don't say you have to do it one way or another, but that's usually where I start people is like, how much running do you feel comfortable right now doing? And if it's 10 seconds, perfect. If it's a minute, perfect. And then we just kind of start from there. And I also teach people proper running form. And then I teach them how to work on their thinking because so much of what holds us back as runners, if we're plus size or older, or just have never really felt athletic, is the beliefs that we have that like, oh, I'm too fat to be a runner. I'm too old to be a runner. It's just not for me. And so I kind of like, that's another place that I start people like, let's examine what you're thinking about yourself right now that might be keeping you from getting out there and putting your shoes on and going for a run.
Absolutely, yes. I always see these things online that are talking about eating like an asshole, and I always say, but are you thinking like an asshole is so much more important. And so along those same lines, I've built a community around the idea of the retired serial quitter. So the woman who constantly has quit over and over, whether that's on running or any other, hobby that they might have, fitness, wellness, whatever. Their goals, their vision. And so what are some of the ways that you promote to keep going when that quitting starts, the thoughts of quitting start to creep in, especially around something as trying mentally as running?
Yeah. Well, I think I actually try to reframe it from like, hey, it's not so much that you've quit on yourself. You've just decided that right in this moment, you're not going to pursue it. And I think like that helps reframe it a little bit from, oh, I keep giving up to more like, oh, I'm just taking a break right now and I'm figuring out what my next step is. So that's one way for sure to reframe it. Instead of saying like, I keep quitting on myself, it's like, no, I start and I stop and I start and I stop, and that's just fine. And sort of taking the judgment out of it, because I think using the word quit, we equate quitting with weakness, with laziness, with lack of discipline. And I kind of feel like discipline is a skill that we're not born knowing how to stick to something forever, right? And especially like as we get older, we're often taught like, well, if you can't do it right, you shouldn't do it at all. And a lot of us develop these very perfectionist mindsets. So I kind of encourage people to say, like, stop using the word quit when you refer to yourself, because that does have a lot of negative connotation, and just say like, I'm figuring it out. And all right, well, I tried this and that didn't feel great, or that didn't work, or hey, it did feel great. And you know what? Like, my brain just sort of shanghaied me and it told me that today was a terrible day to run, even though it felt great. Like, sometimes our brains are, I feel like they just play these little tricks on us and we accidentally believe them, right? Like when you wake up in the morning and the night before you're like, I'm going to go for a run tomorrow. I got all my clothes laid out, and you wake up in the morning and you think, I'm just not in the mood, right? And that's just like a thought. It's like kind of a habitual thought that most of us have. But the reason that you might follow through on it is because you believe it. You're like, oh, if I'm not in the mood, I shouldn't go for a run. I should always feel motivated. I should always feel excited. I should always be like, woohoo, it's running day. And the truth is that I rarely wake up and think, I can't wait to go for a run. But right, like I don't know about you, but that's not a thought that like hops into my head very often. But I think what I've done to keep myself moving forward is thinking like, yeah, you know what? You're never in the mood, but you always love how you feel afterwards. Or, hey, let's just do 10 minutes. Let's just do something. And something is always better than nothing, right? And so I kind of have to sort of work with the perfectionist side of myself that is like, hey, if it's not 3 miles, it doesn't count. And I think that's another reason why people quit. They think, I don't have time to do the whole thing, so I'm just going to do nothing. And I think that's always a lie, right? This is a perfect example. Yesterday, I was meeting a friend of mine in Philly for the day, and we were going to go to brunch and go to the spa, and we just had this beautiful day planned out. And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to get 45 minutes on the Peloton, and I have my whole schedule, and I'm going to hop in the shower and all these things, right? And then I started doing that Wordle thing on my phone, and then I started doing a crossword puzzle, right? And like Wordle, I love that. But the next thing I know, I'm like, oh crap. Now I don't have time to do my whole 45-minute Peloton workout. All I've got time for is 20 minutes. And I watched my brain say like, well, you blew it. You might as well just get in the shower and like get to Philly. And then I was like, no, actually I didn't blow it. I'm like, I can do 20 minutes. So I hopped in the Peloton and I did my 20 minutes. And then when I got to the end of that 20 minutes, I'm like, I kind of want to do a little bit more, and I can call my friend and just tell her I'm going to be a little bit late. And honestly, I ended up getting there like early anyway, but then I was like, well, no, I don't want to call her and tell her I'm going to be late, but you know, maybe I don't have to like flat iron my hair, right? Maybe I can like skip some other things and get another 10 minutes in. So I ended up doing 30 minutes instead of 45. And I felt so good afterwards. I was like, oh, like that's it, right? Like, I think that the bargaining and the negotiation with yourself to say like, well, what can we do is one way to kind of getting around, the quote unquote quitting, because if you allow yourself to not be perfect and just do something, you make much more progress than if you say, if it's not perfect, I'm doing nothing. Because when we do nothing, we don't get anywhere.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, yes. The mental warfare of negotiations. That's so true. Yeah. So I lean into the concept of, if we could show up 70% of the time, 100% of the time, how would that look versus us trying to go 100% all of the time? And I like how your negotiation was sort of backwards. Like, well, what can I take out of my routine so that I can work out more? So I love that.
Well, and I think, but the thing is, like, I didn't have that thought before I started working out. I was like, what's the bare minimum of exercise? But then once my body was warmed up, then I was willing to negotiate to get more exercise. But I don't think I was capable of that in the beginning. So it's just, it's
Definitely.
funny. Like, that's why I think, like, just do something and then evaluate. Because very often, you know, exercise changes our brain every single time.
Yes, 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 yes. I say action cures everything. So I'm like, that's the perfect example.
Yeah.
You were in it, you were taking action, and you were like, I want more. So I love that.
Yeah.
There's this quote card that floats around often that says, it talks about this concept of choose your hard. So, what is your thoughts around choosing your hard? Because when it comes to running, there are so many. There's so many choices of choosing your hard, if you will.
Yeah, I actually love that quote, even though I think it's kind of, I think it kind of came out of maybe like hustle and grind culture, which I'm not a fan of. But I do love the quote because I always think to myself, well, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning and go for a run, but it's also hard to feel guilty all day. It's also hard, right, when my body starts to feel kind of creaky and achy because I haven't exercised for enough days in a row. And it's hard to criticize myself, right? It feels hard when I'm like saying things like, oh, like you missed another day, right? Like that hard feels awful. And the hard of just getting up and doing the run it's a different kind of hard, right? So I choose the hard of let's do the thing that is like an immediate decision versus what I know is going to be a long, protracted mental battle with myself, where I catalog all of my failings because I missed a workout versus like just getting the F up and walking out the door and doing the run. So to me, that's what choose your hard means. Like, do you want to feel uncomfortable now, or do you want to feel like really bad about yourself later? And I mean, sometimes I choose feeling bad about myself later in the moment, but most of the time, the hard that I choose is like, yeah, it's 10 degrees outside. Let's just go. Let's just do it.
So that choosing, in those moments, sometimes the choosing the feel, quote unquote, feel bad about yourself later, I feel like that takes resilience and owning your confidence to, yes, you're going to feel that in the moment, but you have your very next choice is going to play into if you continue to feel that over time, right? And so things like resilience and confidence play a lot into, they come into play a lot in running. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that the mental game is so strong in this sport, particularly, but in life as well. And so those struggles of all or nothing mentality, that perfectionism mindset, can really deter you from the consistency that it takes to continue to run over time, right? And so what are the best tools that you provide your groups about staying consistent?
Yeah, I have a lot of tools around that. One of them is something that I call the minimum baseline, which is what is the least amount of exercise that you can commit to that's not going to create drama in your brain about doing it. And it might be literally 5 minutes. And what happens then, of course, is your mind is like, oh, 5 minutes isn't enough to count. Why should I bother? But if you can just commit like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever your minimum baseline is, like I'm always at least going to do this amount. If you can commit to that, what it does is it builds up the habit of being somebody who just follows through on her commitments. Because you set the commitment bar low enough that you're not going to be like, oh my God, I can't do 2 miles today, right? Like, so set the commitment bar low enough so that it's really easy to comply with. And that's when you start to build up this evidence for yourself that like, hey, I actually am somebody who follows through when I say I'm going to do something. And from there, you kind of get this confidence of, okay, well, if I can do 5 minutes a day, maybe I can do 10 minutes. Or if I can do 10 minutes, maybe I can do 20 minutes, right? So it's sort of like build your confidence, but you've always got that I call it the drama threshold. Like wherever your brain starts to get like, that's too much. We can't do it. Like that, your minimum baseline has to be below that amount. So I think that's one great tool to build consistency, and just say like, all right, I'm going to do my minimum baseline 30 days in a row. And maybe your minimum baseline is 5 minutes a day of running 4 times a week and 5 minutes of strength training twice a week, whatever it is, right? Like start building the habit that way. And that creates the confidence, because you can look back and say, oh, look, I did that for 30 days. I'm probably going to do it tomorrow. I'm probably going to be able to do that. So I think that's one tool. And then resilience that's for sure a skill that we talk about, in that I like to say, don't expect everything to go perfectly. Like, be psyched when it does, but expect that there's always going to be, you're going to wake up and your Garmin wasn't charged, or your internet's out, or I don't know, like the clothes in the dryer, your running clothes didn't dry in the dryer, or it's snowing, or whatever it is. Expect that stuff's going to happen. And the resilient runner knows ahead of time, like there's always a way to deal with this. There's always like an option, and plans ahead, right? So I mean, when I would drive back and forth to the gym a lot when I was working like a corporate job, I always had extra running shoes, an extra pair of headphones. Like I had extra hair ties, all extras in my car, because just in case I got to the gym and realized I forgot my gear, or, if you're used to running outside and then one day you get up and it's snowing, then like, okay, well, either make sure that you've got winter running gear available, or like think ahead to, where's an indoor track that I can go? Or do I have can I get a $10 a month membership to Planet Fitness so that there's always a treadmill waiting for me? So I think that's resilience to me, is expecting that stuff's going to go wrong and just figuring out how to deal with it, rather than saying like, oh, I can't go because I didn't anticipate this. I think it's very rare that there are things that happen in our lives that are truly going to prevent us from getting our workout done. I have clients who they live in Canada, where it is extremely cold and snowy, and they're like, all right, well, there's 4 feet of snow on the ground and it's negative 30 degrees. So I am literally going to run laps around my kitchen, or I'm going to run in place, or I'm going to run up and down the stairs, like one way or another. I'm going to get a workout in. And I feel like that's resilience, saying like, what can I do? How can I make this work?
Yes. And that self-trust that you will figure it out. Whatever your circumstances are, how difficult, 4 feet of snow is, that you have that trust within yourself that you will figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that. Super powerful. So I have a group of CEOs, and we meet and we have this term of being disruptive to your industry, disruptive to the social norms, if you will. And I feel like you promote fitness and running above diet culture. And that is disruptive in the best way, right? It's just like not something that's always happening, or it's usually, this program hand in hand with something that has to do with diet, right? And it's so much about learning what your body is capable at all size, and how we can be really boundless at any size, right? And so how do you deal with body positivity and avoiding that quote unquote diet culture in your movement?
Well, I think partly I just don't teach people that running is a way to lose weight, because it actually is a really terrible weight loss plan. Right? It really, really is. But it's a great way to lose the mental weight. Like if you were like weighed down by, like negative thoughts about yourself and so forth, I think running is a great way to lose that. But really, like, my message to the world is you can be a runner in the body you have right now. And that there is a way for you to become a runner. And I'm not telling folks like, hey, if you weigh 250 pounds, I'm going to teach you how to run a 5K in under 30 minutes. Like, because it's physics, right? And it's likely there may be a few unicorns out there, but I think the average person is not going to have the time and resources to put in to create that kind of speed for themselves. But like, I don't think that that's necessary, right? Like, we're not your average runners. We run for the sheer joy of it. We run because it gives us confidence. We run because it makes our body feel good. We run because it's a way to be social with other people. We're not out there running to set any records. And I think like that's the disruption that I want to see in the industry, is that, exercise is not always a path to weight loss. And I know it's part of any kind of, great weight loss plan, but I don't want to be that person that's like helping. Well, first of all, because I've got an easy 100 pounds that I could lose. And I think like for me to try and help other people lose weight would be a little disingenuous when that's not something that A, that I've ever been successful at, and B, that I really want to pursue anyway. So I think the disruption for me is to like, hey, fitness industry, let's stop messing around with people's heads and telling them that you need to look a certain way to be happy. You need to eat a certain way to be healthy. You need to have this kind of body to be healthy, because you can be healthy in any body, right? Like you can feel good about yourself in any body. Like a thin body and a fat body, like one is not better than the other. And I think that's kind of the frustrating thing for me, is that there's still, and I even find it in my own brain, like there's so much, we're taught so much that you should always be striving to be thinner. You should always be striving to be more attractive. You should always be striving to be wealthier, right? We should always want to be trying to like fit ourselves into this mold of the ideal person. And I think that's, like, my message is that, like, there is no ideal person. There is no perfect way to be. So, like, hey, pick a way that you like and go for it. And if that's an overweight body, like, I'm all in for it, right? If you want to lose weight. But the other thing is, if you want to lose weight and you love your reasons for wanting to lose weight, I'm all in for that too. I don't necessarily tell people, like, you can't lose weight. And I think that's the body positivity movement. Sometimes we find folks in that movement that are like, if you like, deliberate weight loss is kind of like an insult to the body positivity movement. Yes, and I don't think that's true. I think it's like, it's my body. I get to decide if I want to increase, decrease, stay the same, right? Like, that's on me. Me deciding that I want to lose weight doesn't mean that I think being overweight is bad. Right. So I think that's one thing the body positivity movement kind of like gets a little bit wrong, and people get right. Cause there's just as much shaming. Like, if you're in the body positivity movement, like, I've seen members of that movement shame people for wanting to lose weight.
Absolutely.
I'm like, that's like, that's the exact thing as shaming somebody for being fat. Right. Yes. It's so like, hey, let's just, like, to me, body positivity is like, my body, my decision. My body, my choice. I get to decide how I want to treat it, how I want to love it, and so forth. But I think diet mentality for me is this belief that thinner is better, and that we should always be striving for that. And that, I completely reject that idea. And so that's something that I teach my folks, is like, if you want to lose weight, awesome. But like, that's not the focus of any of my groups. That's not the focus of any of my programs. Yeah, that was a very long answer to your question, but I have many thoughts.
You brought up some incredible points, absolutely. And it really is, it's your own personal journey, whatever that looks like. But I like how you worded that. So when you are in your run and it's starting to get more challenging, difficult, and even though we coach, we teach all of these mindset things, it's still, we're humans, right? And negative thoughts can come in, or some comparison can come in, somebody's passing you, whatever it is. What do you say to yourself when the running gets challenging, like in the moment? Do you have a word that you go to? Do you have a phrase you go to? Like, what pulls you back to, no, I'm a badass, I'm a rebel runner, I'm not your average runner, like, I can do this? What brings you back?
I think I very often say to myself, these are the miles that I came for, which to me means that like the change happens in the hard miles. And so if I'm trying to change my
So
running ability, right? If I'm training for a long distance event and it starts to get hard, I think like, oh, but these are the miles I came for, right?
Yes.
This is the time when my body is changing, when I'm getting stronger, when I'm gaining more endurance. And most of the time that works. Sometimes, I mean, I'm a real proponent of listening to your body as well. And there have been times when I've been doing a run and I'm like, these actually are not the miles that I came for. And I'm going to stop
Where
now.
can I return these?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm not interested in these miles. Please, someone take them back. But really, like, these are the miles I came for. Like when it started when I was training for the Philadelphia Marathon a few years ago, and I had I had 16 miles on my schedule, and I was running a half marathon that day. And I said, okay, I'm just gonna run the half marathon. I'm gonna grab my medal and just keep going and do 3 more miles. And I did exactly that, but it was, that was the first time I'd ever gone longer than 13 miles. And so I did, like, I was about a mile into the extra 3, and everything just hurt. Everything hurt. Like, my legs just were achy and tired, and I was tired. And that's when I started to have a conversation with myself of like, come on, it's 2 more miles. You can do this. And I realized, like, oh, on marathon day, I'm going to have to go farther than this. And I'm going to have to figure out how to talk to myself. And that's when I just started thinking about, like, well, these next 2 miles are probably really important, because if I can go 16 miles, then I can go 18. And if I can go 18, I can go 20. And I was like, these are the important miles. And I can't run these miles until I've done the first 13. Like, I can't do that last 3 until I've already, kind of exhausted my body. So yeah, that's usually what I tell myself. And then sometimes I say, like, come on, Jill, stop whining. I also use that.
Yeah, the real talk.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. These are the miles I came for. And that's so applicable to so many other things. Like, these are the debt payments I came for, or these are the tough conversations I came for. So yeah, I love that. And I like to ask, as a goal setting coach, like, what are your goals for 2022? What do you got on the radar this year for Jill?
So I actually don't have any specific running goals. This year, I think I'm going to stick to like 10K or less distances. But I do have a fitness goal. Nice. I've decided I'm going to get myself to a 200-pound deadlift, which is like, I've never lifted. I mean, until this year, I'd never deadlifted more than 100 pounds. I'd worked myself up to a 100-pound deadlift many years ago, and then sort of let it go. And then last year I thought, all right, let's just see how strong I can get. And so I set a goal for 200-pound deadlift. I'm currently deadlifting 130 pounds, and I'm like extremely like blown. Right? I know. I'm kind of like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is happening, right? Like, this is something I'm actually going to do. So that's kind of my crazy goal. And my extra super secret goal is to deadlift my own body weight, which I don't know if I'll get there this year. I'll probably get there next year. But 200 pounds is like the first step in the process. So that's my 2022 goal. And I've been working for about a year on being able to do an unassisted pull-up. And I know that's a very long range goal, but I'm able to hang from my pull-up bar now for 30 seconds at a time, which like 6 months ago, I could hang for exactly 2 seconds, and then I would fall off. And like about a month ago, I was able to do 4 30-second hangs in a row. And I was like, what? I'm like looking around like, did I just do that?
Like, hey, everybody, come see how good I look.
I know. I was so proud of myself. So proud. And of course, I train in my apartment, right? I have my trainers over Zoom. So there's nobody there except her to witness this amazing event. But anyway, so those are mine for my goals, which are, they're not running related, but they're running adjacent, I guess.
Totally. Yes, definitely. And that mental toughness. So very cool. How did you figure out, so with those, I feel like they also demand that minimum sort of baseline of where you're starting. And so how did you figure out, well, I can deadlift 100 pounds? Like, how did you work up to that still? Or was that like your starting point?
No, that was, so I started working with the current trainer I have at the end of, is it the end of 2020? I think we've been working together for almost a year and a half. So anyway, I started working with her just because I said, like, I was struggling to strength train routinely, because that's one of the things that my brain is always like, this does not sound like fun. Mm-hmm. And so I hired it was the middle of COVID. I hired an online trainer, and she's a power lifter. And so I didn't know that at the time, but we'd been working together for about 6 months. And I really just wanted the accountability of somebody saying, like, lift this thing, do this thing. But after about 6 months, I think she was kind of like slowly like trying to see how strong I could get. And after about 6 months, she said, I would love to see you deadlifting 200 pounds. And I don't think we had done any deadlifting yet, but I was like, that sounds like a lot of weight, but okay, I'm in. And so we started at 40 pounds. And so that was like a little less than a year ago. We started at 40 pounds. But then she was like, all right, every week we are working on I meet with her twice a week, and we're always doing things to kind of progress and progress my pull-ups. And so she's put together a whole program that does that and also supports my running. So yeah, so it was kind of her idea, and I said, okay. But I really like deadlifting. It's very satisfying to like realize that you can just lift 130 pounds off the floor, like, no problem. And it's so funny too, because I'm always like, I did 130 pounds. Oh my God, I'm deadlifting so much. And she's like, I cannot wait for the day that you're deadlifting 200 pounds and you look back at 130 and it feels light. Because right now it feels very heavy. So yeah, it's so fun.
I love that consistency, right? And you just grow and grow and grow. Love that. Well, can you share how people can connect with you, become a not your average runner, if you will, a rebel runner? So how can they get to know Jill?
Absolutely. So my podcast is called Not Your Average Runner, and it is available wherever podcasts can be found. My website is notyouraverage-runner.com. My Instagram is notyouraverage-runner. And if you go over to my website, I actually do have a free 30-day starter plan that is basically for somebody who's brand new to running. So notyouraverage-runner.com, there's a little bar that you can put your email address in, and I'll send it right to you.
Yes, and I highly recommend the 30 days because I just feel like they're such good little gems, little tidbits. They're digestible and they make sense and they progress on each other. And so highly, highly recommend those. Thank you so much, Jill, for joining me today on Tailor Made Tasty, the podcast. I'm so excited for listeners to connect with you and join in the movement. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, y'all, it's time for the quote of the episode. The quote this week spoke to me because the entire theme of this podcast and Jill's mission is unexpected. The larger-bodied runners are unexpected. The loving yourself now versus later is unexpected. So the quote is, "It is strange, but true, that the most important turning points of life often come at the most unexpected times and in the most unexpected ways. So that is Napoleon Hill. Take that into your week, your month, maybe even your year, and enjoy the unexpected. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my community. I'm so glad you showed up today, and let's go get there. Look at you, crushing it. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Tailor Made Tasty podcast. My hope is you always leave with a takeaway to implement in your own goal-crushing journey. I would love if you could take a moment to leave a review. And if you're looking for a community of goal boss badasses just like you, be sure to check out tailormadetasty.com/membership.